Hello, everybody, and welcome to our After the FAFSA webinar. Thank you for joining us today. This is Kate Watts with collegefortn.org who's speaking. I will be the person who is monitoring all the questions. So if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, you can just enter them in the chat box. And I am here with Jason C. of the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation and Graham Thomas. They will just have a few words for you now.
Hi, good afternoon or morning, depending on what time zone you're joining us in. This is Graham with Tennessee Achieve, so we appreciate you taking the time to mentor the students over the course of the year, but also to take the extra time to log into the webinar today and learn a little bit more about the FAFSA and what exactly is going to happen with their financial aid now that it's submitted. Jason is our expert, but just on the front end, some of you submitted some questions that were a little more Tennessee Achieve specific. So I'm going to address those. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and then I'll hang around. If you have more specific Tennessee Achieve the questions, I'll tackle them at the end, but please feel free to use that chat box that Kate was talking about to ask questions as we go along. So one of the questions that was submitted when folks registered was, how do your students get their scores now that they have completed high school? I'm assuming that that's talking about their ACT scores and their transcripts, and that's going to be information that the students are going to need to request from their counseling office. They will send them over to the college of their choice, so the students will many times submit an addressed envelope to the college that they want to choose that's postage paid already, so a stamp on it, and the counselors will send it straight over. Students can request that information themselves and take it to the college, but it will have to be delivered to the admissions office in a sealed envelope. There can't be any way that the student could tamper with it. So those are the two options there. Another question that we had was, what do we work with our students about after all the completed paperwork, after they've completed all their paperwork and have been accepted to the college of their choice? All of that is kind of laid out in your mentor handbook. We'll continue to send you weekly updates on things that are coming up, but one of the big ones that will be coming our way, and I know Jason's going to spend some time on it today, is their FAFSA verification. That will be going on over the summer. We'll have new student orientations, and then really those first few weeks of their first semester can be a time for students where they just feel a little bit lost, a little bit confused, and so it's always good for someone to be checking in, kind of reassuring them that you're still there to help them, and you can have all kinds of questions. Vocabulary can become a big issue at that point in time. Buildings, where to go, what is a semester, what's a credit hour, the whole process, if no one in their family has ever been to college, can just really be confusing for the students. So you could get a wide array of questions. Some of those FAQs, again, are in your mentor handbook. If you don't have that anymore, you can find it on our website. There's a PDF, so you can always reference it there. You can print it off or just take a look at it on your computer, but know that that resource is still available to you. Another question we had was, is there a deadline for submitting our income information? So Jason is going to talk to you about verification. All of the students' financial aid verification has to be processed at the college of their choice by August 1st. For the community colleges and the four-year colleges, and then October 1st for the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, which means they need to get those documents into the financial aid office at their college by June 15th. All of the students in the state will be trying to complete this step if they're selected at the same time, which means the financial aid offices get backlogged. So June 15th would be a good, safe date to make sure that all of their paperwork is processed by August 1st. If they're selected for verification, they're going to be notified through their college accounts. So over the course of the next 2.5, 3 months, the students really need to be keeping a very close eye on those college accounts. When they get their acceptance letter in the mail, they will have step-by-step directions on how to register those college accounts, and then they need to be in there. I would recommend them to check it every single day, but at least 2 or 3 times a week to make sure that they're not missing anything, and that will all come to those college accounts. So it's very important that they get them set up and then that they begin checking them on a regular basis. The next question was, what if a student wants to attend a different college now? Here's where this can start to get a little bit tricky for the students, and some things that they're probably not aware of. As far as we are concerned, we would hope we have that priority deadline of February 15th. So we would hope that the students have already applied to the college of their choice. If they are still between maybe 2 or 3 colleges, we would recommend them go ahead and apply to all 2 or 3 to get in the system so the colleges can identify them, and then we will kind of go from there. But they probably need to make up their minds, I would say really here in the next month or so. Because all of this financial aid information is going to start getting sent to the colleges, and they're going to want it to be sent to the right one. So let's say, for example, you had a student did their FAFSA, completed their FAFSA, and listed the University of Tennessee as their first choice, and then maybe Pellissippi, Roane State, Nashville State, Cleveland State, Chattanooga State, further on down the line. What that means for that student is that all of their state money is going to be, all of their state information, so the Hope Scholarship, Tennessee Promise, the TSAA grant, is all going to be sent to the University of Tennessee, which means the students need to get that institution changed. And the way that they will do that is by accessing their account with the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation. This is where the students actually applied for Tennessee Promise. But what the best way, the easiest way for them to do that is to log into their TSAC. TSAC is where you see where Jason works, Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation. Log into their account, and that website is www.tn.gov/TSAC, T-S-A-C, student portal, all one word, so TSAC student portal. And they will complete a change of institution request. They will put the college that they will then be attending. So that example I just used, let's say a Knoxville student put University of Tennessee, has now changed their mind and decided to go to Pellissippi. They will then need to put Pellissippi as their choice so that Pellissippi receives all of their state financial aid. They don't have to go back in and update the FAFSA with their college of choice unless they didn't put Pellissippi on their FAFSA at all. So if the student only put UT and left off any other colleges, then the student would need to go back in, update their FAFSA, and add Pellissippi to the list so that Pellissippi is receiving all of their information. That's where it's going to get a little bit confusing. That's where students will probably have a lot of questions. I think Jason is going to touch on this again to just kind of make sure everyone's got the information and that it's clear for you. And we'll be talking to you about this in this round of team meetings that started this week. So if we haven't gotten to you yet, know that it's coming, and your students will be aware of it. And we'll also get that out to you in some of these weekly emails. So you'll get more information, more detail. We'll put it in writing for you, but that's kind of the process going forward. 2 more questions that we had, I think. One was, what are solutions for book cost? One option is for students that are going to receive excess financial aid. So some of your students are going to get a full Pell Grant, a TSAA award, it's the state grant, and the Hope Scholarship, and they're going to have more money than it costs to go to one of the community or technical colleges. So they'll get a refund check every semester, and they can use that for their books. Also, any outside scholarships that your students receive. So maybe their parent's employer gave them a scholarship, an athletic scholarship, they won an essay contest and received a $500 scholarship, something like that. All of those other forms of financial aid the students get to keep to use for books. So there are some other options out there. Students can also rent books through their colleges. They can look online. There are ways to find more affordable books than just using the bookstore. The last question we got from the registration was asking a little bit more information about the ACT or the college test that the students need to complete. So if they're going to a community college, they have to have an ACT. The colleges are looking at their ACT scores just to place them into their classes, not to accept them, but what they're looking for is a 19 in math and reading and an 18 in English. If they've hit those benchmarks, then they are college ready. They will go to their community college, start out in college level classes, and start earning college credit. If they're below those scores, they're going to start out taking what's called learning support classes. They used to be maybe more familiar to you as remedial or developmental classes. Tennessee Promise will pay for those and will cover them. They're just not going to be earning college credit while they're taking those classes. Some of the programs at the TCAP do not require an ACT score. but will require an ACT equivalency test that they will have to take to get into the program. So if your students are going to the TCAP and they have not taken that ACT yet, they need to reach out to the TCAP and find out if they have to take that ACT or not. The Tennessee Promise, the last ACT they can take to, well, it's a priority deadline, but the ACT, we would like them to have their ACT done by the April 18th date, which is a registration deadline of March 13th. So they've got less than 10 days to register for that ACT, and they just need to see their counseling office. Looks like we had one question submitted for me while I was talking just now, and it was, when do students need to register for classes? Again, this is a priority deadline. They won't be dropped for this, but we have a priority deadline of July 1st. The sooner the better. It opens up in early April. I think April 4th is the deadline, or is when classes can start to be registered, but you know, the sooner the better. That way they're going to be able to build their class schedule around their work schedule, around their just life schedule. So the sooner they can do that, the better. A lot of the colleges will host new student orientations this summer. The students will attend the orientation and will get registered while they're there. So again, they'll want to register an RSVP for an orientation earlier in the summer, and they're going to want to get it in by July 1. This will really help with their financial aid. If they are switching their classes around really kind of right up before school starts, it can kind of mess with their financial aid, especially being a last dollar. The college's financial aid staffs have to go in and do that stuff manually, so if they have applied their scholarship and then they start to move things around, it can create some issues right before classes start. So we'd really like for them to get registered by July 1 and kind of keep their schedule locked in. One thing that we always recommend students to do, anytime they call the college and talk to them about financial aid or admissions or whatever it might be, they need to call, they need to tell them their name, their student ID, and they need to let whoever they're on the phone with or whoever they're visiting in person know they're a Tennessee Promise student. This way the colleges know all the deadlines, they know all the requirements, and it will help keep them eligible. But anytime they're going to do anything with their classes, add a class, drop a class, they always need to call the financial aid office, make sure it's not going to affect their financial aid. And we would prefer that they call someone on Tennessee Achieve staff just so we can double check on it also. Let's see, it looks like there's one more question that just came in. A student is looking to start college in August of 2016. Is there anything they should do to remain eligible? One of the requirements of Tennessee Promise is that they start this coming fall, the fall immediately after high school graduation. So they can't take any time off. And then the scholarship is good for 5 consecutive semesters. So if they ever take a break, it will cause them to lose their Tennessee Promise eligibility. There's a few exceptions to that. There's some medical exceptions. There's a military deferment. That form, if that is the case for your students, is on our website, tnachieves.org. It's called an appeal form. They can complete that appeal form. And again, medical, for sure, there's certain medical deferments, and there's a military deferment. But a lot of those other things that students may put on there, I think there is even potentially a religious deferment, but if it's just simply, I want to take a semester to find myself, that's not going to fly. So that's on there. Students can go in there and see that and see what will qualify for them, and they can fill it out. We'll take a look at it and we'll let them know if it qualifies or not. But those are all the questions I had on the front end that were more Tennessee Achieve specific. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to jump into much more detailed information on the financial aid side, and then I'll hang around here at the end, and if there's any more questions, we'll help you out. But thanks again for being here today, and Jason, take it away.
All right, Graham, thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you, perhaps on Eastern Standard Time. So like Graham, I have several questions here that y'all did a great job of sending them in, so that could lead Graham and I in terms of what we need to discuss. The first one that I'm going to address was, when will students begin to hear responses from FAFSA? Do they need to log in to check their status? So for those of you who were with us in our previous webinars, as I went through the FAFSA application, one thing that hopefully I addressed a little bit, again, as I said, guys, I don't expect you to remember every single word that I say or that Graham or Kate says, but once the FAFSA is submitted, okay, if they've used an email address right, at the very beginning of the FAFSA in the student demographics section, then FAFSA, once that FAFSA is processed, federal student aid will send them an email indicating your FAFSA has been processed. Or, on the other hand, your FAFSA has some errors. You need to return the FAFSA to make corrections. So in terms of when will students begin to hear responses from FAFSA, if you and I submit a FAFSA today, what FAFSA always says is within 72 hours of that submission, the student's FAFSA should be processed, and federal student aid should send an email to the student containing his or her specifically student aid report that they can review to see, check for errors and things like that. Now, if you have worked with a mentee who does not have an email address, nor the parent had an email address, so they just left the email portion blank on the FAFSA, then instead of emailing, FAFSA will mail the student his or her student aid report to, again, let the student know that it's been processed, and if there are any errors, here's what the student needs to now follow up on. So in other words, if you and I are working with a student that's completed FAFSA, they should have either A, received an email from federal student aid letting them know that the FAFSA has been processed or has errors, or for those that did not use an email, they should have been mailed, received a letter from federal student aid, or specifically a student aid report letting them know what's going on with their FAFSA and stuff like that. Again, kind of referencing the previous webinars a little bit, understand that from FAFSA, and so I'm using the term FAFSA and federal student aid interchangeably here, from FAFSA or from federal student aid, remember, the student's only going to know whether or not he or she qualifies for a Pell Grant or not, all right? In terms of eligibility for state aid, that's going to come from us at the state level, all right? So in other words, eligibility for the Tennessee Hope Scholarship, eligibility for the Tennessee Student Assistance Award, those programs' eligibility will be communicated by us at TSAC. So again, the only thing FAFSA/federal student aid will be letting the student know is A, your FAFSA's been processed, B, are there any mistakes, and then finally C, basically do you qualify for a Pell Grant or not, and if you do qualify for Pell, how much is your estimated award? So hopefully that addresses the first question, when will students begin to hear responses from FAFSA? Now guys, I've worked with many of you, and Graham's worked with many of you. There's always that chance when you and I work with a student that's not received any information from federal student aid for some reason. My encouragement in that case is, maybe follow up with me, and that way I can look in the system to see if we've received the FAFSA and then kind of ascertain, what's going on here. Again, if they, and I hate to say this, a lot of the mistakes that we're seeing, as it relates to FAFSA and eligibility for Tennessee Promise, unfortunately, is application driven by the student. So, for example, perhaps they entered their email address wrong in the FAFSA, so that may be the reason why they're not receiving any communication. Or maybe they now changed their email account. You guys, and then some of you are probably learning this working with mentees as you have. So again, if for some reason a student who has submitted the FAFSA has not heard anything at all from FAFSA, I'd say give me a shout and I'll investigate that for you. Second question, how do we update the FAFSA from initially submitting the estimated income information to now updating it with, quote, the actual 2013 data? And this is where, guys, I'm going to turn, for those of you who are following along, I do have a little slide presentation, have a few slides that are going to walk you through, updating the FAFSA application. So a student will return to www.fafsa.gov, and they will log in, just like they did the first time. They'll log in, they'll enter their first name, last name, social, and date of birth, and then they'll come to their My FAFSA page. Let's go back to the student aid report for a second. let's say a student is, or a parent's letting you know, well, we haven't heard anything from FAFSA. If they log back in, they can view or print their student aid report, which again is either generally being communicated with them via email or by regular mail, depending whether or not they entered an email address. So I guess maybe the best way before contacting me is have that student log back into their FAFSA. And if you're looking at this slide on the screen right now, look towards the bottom, that red box where the first bullet says view or print your student aid report. This is where they can look at their student aid report and read through it and see if there are any errors that they need to address, okay? Now, the second bullet point, if you've now returned to FAFSA to make corrections, to begin making those corrections, you will click Make FAFSA Corrections. FAFSA will then ask for your PIN, will ask for the student's PIN, their personal identification number. The student will enter it, and then they will be back at the FAFSA, be back into their FAFSA where they can make any corrections that they need to. Now, assuming they're really just returning to FAFSA to make corrections to their tax information, here's FAFSA's advice, which is also my advice, obviously, in this case. Once the parent and student have filed their 2014 taxes, what FAFSA advises is they need to wait 3 weeks, right? Wait 3 weeks before they return and make corrections. Now, if you're looking at the screen right now, you will read the little text box that says, once taxes have been filed, wait 3 to 11 weeks, return to the financial information tab of the FAFSA and select already completed to kind of begin that process. Note the time frame, 3 to 11 weeks. So basically, we've got 3 categories of tax filers. Those of us who file taxes electronically or have our CPA that filed electronically, FAFSA generally will say within 3 weeks, IRS should have your information ready for you to retrieve it for your FAFSA, all right? However, for those of us who may still do a paper filing, FAFSA says you need to wait up to 11 weeks, right? Because obviously if you paper file your tax information, that means once the IRS receives that information, they then have to manually enter that into their system. So it could be up to 11 weeks for your information to be ready for in order to update your FAFSA, specifically using the IRS data retrieval tool, guys, and that's kind of where we're leading to, is this IRS data retrieval tool. So that's why I have the 3 to 11 week range. I'm going to share something with you guys from my experience. For electronic tax filers who generally receive a refund, generally within 3 weeks, they're going to be able to use the data retrieval tool via FAFSA, all right? But for those of us who e-file but who owe tax, right, then for us, it could be anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks, because, you know, what I learned last year and other years using the data retrieval information is the IRS waits for you to pay what you owe before it releases the data to FAFSA through the IRS data retrieval tool. Okay, so again, that's kind of why I have the broad 3 to 11 week window there. You know, in terms of being able to use, let me say this, being able to use specifically the IRS data retrieval tool. Graham mentioned earlier verification. Okay, for those students who are selected for verification, the college will want them to update their tax information, preferably using the IRS data retrieval tool. And that's kind of where this wait comes in at 3 to 11 weeks, because that's what you're waiting on, is being able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Guys, you and I at any time can go back in and manually update the FAFSA with 2014 information, but specifically to update it with specific information directly from the IRS as the source, that's where this wait 3 to 11 weeks time frame comes in. All right, so hopefully I'm making myself clear here in terms of updating the FAFSA. Preferably, and specifically thinking about verification for those that might be selected, then you're going to have to say wait at least 3 weeks, and it would be best for you to use the data retrieval because from a verification perspective, that's what the college will want you to use. All right, we're going to go back, touch on that here again in a bit. But so you're back in the FAFSA. Your CPA e-filed your taxes, let's say 4 or 5 weeks ago. You return. You're going to change your response from, I will file my taxes to now I've already completed. And then once that happens, a couple of questions will appear. And here I'm on the next slide. And the questions are, did you, the parents, and this is kind of looking at a parent screenshot, file an amended tax return, yes or no? Second question, did the parents file a Puerto Rican or foreign tax return, yes or no? And then finally, did you file taxes electronically in the last 3 weeks or by mail in the last 11 weeks? That's where that time frame comes in, yes or no. If the parent and or student is able to answer no to these 3 questions, they'll be prompted to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And the box will pop up below, which will ask for the parent's PIN, and whichever the parents, quote, has the PIN, they will enter it, and then we'll click link to IRS. A screen will come up saying that you are now leaving FAFSA momentarily and being transferred to the IRS website. Parents or students will click OK. That will then, a new screen will open, which will be irs.gov, where they will see this screen. And basically what has happened is by using the parent's PIN, some of the information from the parental section of the FAFSA, will be communicated to IRS, so they kind of know who they're working with here. An initial message will pop up, quote, from the web page, indicating this is U.S. government system, it's for authorized use only, yada, yada, yada. Click OK to get rid of that message. And then what they will see is they will see the information that's been transferred from FAFSA, to the irs.gov. So in this case, you see Jane Doe, whose date of birth is, January 1st of 1988, indicating that they filed a joint tax return. So what IRS now needs from Jane Doe in this case is specifically their street address, their city, town, their state, and their zip code. Whatever's used on their tax return, that needs to be entered, okay? And again, if they use the P.O. box or they use an apartment number, they need to just fill in what is missing here. And once they've filled that in, they will click Submit. Assuming the information matches, and assuming the IRS has that tax information now available, they will show the information. IRS will now show you the information that will now be transferred to FAFSA. Okay, so looking at the information to transfer it, towards the bottom of the screen, they will check the box talking about transferring my tax information to FAFSA, and they will click the Transfer Now button to actually have this financial information transferred back to their FAFSA. Now, guys, understand, if you are working with a parent and if their address and everything that they enter that appears on the tax return has been entered correctly, and let's say IRS comes back with the message of, well, your tax information could not be pulled at this time. That may simply mean that the IRS has not prepared their information for FAFSA purposes, right? That kind of goes into what I've learned in the last couple of years, specifically for those individuals that owe taxes. All right, so let's say you have to pay in a little bit more, and so IRS, you have a X amount of dollars that now you need to pay IRS to break even for 2014. Again, you have to pay that, and that check has to clear the bank, and then the IRS has to prepare that information. So, for some using data retrieval, it may not be ready at that time because it's still waiting for your payment, stuff like that, in certain situations, all right? So assuming your information is ready, you will check the box, you'll click transfer now, and now your information will be transferred to FAFSA. You'll be taken back to the FAFSA and to the financial information. And notice on this screenshot, anything that's been transferred will now indicate on the FAFSA form in bold, transferred from the IRS. All right, so just note that. Now, one caveat we need to make here, and this is why I used this screenshot. Notice on the little square box down here, your AGI will be transferred from the IRS to your tax information. But one thing that will not be specifically transferred is how much did your mom make versus how much your dad make in that, say, a married situation, or obviously in a single situation, or head of household, how much does just parent one make or whatever. That may not necessarily be transferred, right? And so what FAFSA will ask them to do is specifically itemize, again, how much did the parent one make and how much did parent two make from, the income earned from work question from the IRS. So if you notice, if you're kind of following along with me, kind of the second statement says your parent's total income earned from working in 2014 was transferred from the IRS, and you see if it's grayed out, it's indicating that it was $44,649. So for married couples, they will then differentiate, well, of that $44,649, how much did the parent one make versus how much did parent two make, and they'll simply use their W-2 to ascertain that information. All right, so just one little caveat there about transferring information from the IRS. Now, once all your corrections are made, FAFSA will show you display a page where you can review those changes. So as a parent and student, you can review those changes, and then then thereafter, the student can submit the changes. Now, one thing I've noticed is sometimes you just click submit and boom, your answers are submitted. But sometimes I've noticed that for some parents and students that they will be prompted for their pins as well. So just FYI on that screen in terms of there about submitting changes. All right. All right, and then that leads you through, and that really kind of concludes the how do you update your estimated tax information. So once you submit that, again, you've now estimated your tax information. All right, so Kate, forgive me. Did you want me to look at something here?
Yes, we have a few questions come in that I assigned to you. Okay. So, what happens when you file an amended return?
All right, so Carolyn, great question. So what happens when you file an amended return? So back to some of those questions, or back to where I said FAFSA will pose the question of are you going to file an amended tax return? If you answer yes, then you're going to be unable to use the data retrieval tool. So in terms of you updating your tax information on FAFSA, you're just going to simply go back and manually update it by, when it asks you, what was your AGI in 2014, look at line 37 on your 1040, you'll look at line 37 on your 1040, and you'll just manually enter that to make that correction on your FAFSA. So again, nothing's wrong with obviously filing an amended tax return. Just understand that if you do file an amended tax return, you will be unable to use the data retrieval tool to automatically bring in transfer in your specific data directly from the IRS, as opposed to you manually entering anything. Now, as it pertains to verification, let me say this. So if, Carolyn, you have a student whose family files an amended tax return, but they've been selected for verification, in order to complete verification for their college or university, their college or university will let them know that they need to either use the data retrieval tool, all right, which they'll be unable to because they do an amended tax return, or B, they're going to have to request a tax transcript from IRS.gov. Again, the college in their communication will walk them through this process of how to complete verification. I mean, Graham talked about it earlier. I mean, this is why these students need to read check their email and their college. You know, if Pellissippi State has directed them to look at their Pellissippi State account or whatever, you know, they need to really, to me, do this on a daily or weekly basis to make sure they're not missing any communication from the school. But a school like Pellissippi State or Nashville State or heck, MTSU, UT Knoxville, Vanderbilt, etc., if you're selected for verification, the college will let you know what you need to do. But specifically to your question about amended tax returns, you know, what happens in terms of updating the tax information, instead of using the data retrieval, they'll just return to FAFSA and manually update all their figures by using their tax return. And then for verification later on, they will request a tax transcript from irs.gov. Another question, I think, and Kate, you just keep me on the right track. What happens with the FAFSA if the parents file their taxes but don't pay their taxes? This is from Christine. You know, Christine, this is where you and I as professionals, you know, you and I can't control everything these parents and students do, all right? So back to what Graham was talking about verification. Understand, folks, 33% of FAFSAs are randomly selected by federal student gov for verification. So that means some of our students who initially submitted their FAFSA and even go back and then make corrections later, some of them will never be asked for any additional information because they're not selected for verification. So in a sense, Christine, if you know, how does that may impact a student's eligibility for aid? Well, if they're not selected for verification, you know, but if the parents quote owe taxes or don't pay their taxes or whatever, does that impact their eligibility for Promise or Hope or Pell or what have you? Well, if they're not selected for verification, it may not impact them, at least this year. But in subsequent years, it could. Again, it's all if they're selected for verification. And where I'm going with this is this. If I'm selected for verification, and if I owe taxes, but to complete verification, I need to either do one or two things for the college. I either need to, A, update my information using the data retrieval tool, or B, I need to request a tax transcript from the IRS. Guess what? If I'm not paid my taxes, then the IRS will not give me either the data retrieval information or the tax transcript until I do. So what that means is I'm not able to complete verification, which means, as Graham said earlier, if you're unable to have your verification processed by August the 1st, then you're no longer eligible for Tennessee Promise if you're unable to meet those requirements. So Christine, you know, that's a good question, and it's something that you and I as a professional, we just have to work, and we trust that hopefully our parents and students are doing the right things they do. But again, if they don't pay the taxes, it could lead to them where their student is not going to receive financial aid, right? It could lead to that point, specifically if their student has been selected for verification. Because at that point in time, the college is going to need certain stuff directly from the IRS that if they are not paying their taxes or whatever, the IRS will withhold until they do, all right? So there's that. Do I need to scroll down, to, Kate, for another question perhaps?
No, I believe that the last question that we've gotten is more aimed at Tennessee Achieves.
Okay. So I'll say that. So Graham, you may have one more question. Let me go to, I've got two more right quick on this sheet of paper. One to kind of clear, or one to just to bring up, and maybe whoever submitted this can come back to us and expound a little bit. The question was problems with FAFSA submissions completed by February 15th and requests for additional information. Rome State in particular. All right, this was the question that was submitted to Kate. Not really quite sure what's being asked or stated there specifically when it says at the end Rome State in particular. guys, again, this is where I'm going to go back to say, and I'm going to go back to the kind of that initial slide from the slide deck. If you think the student has an issue with their FAFSA, they need to pull the student aid report and they need to review their student aid report. And how they review, they pull their student aid report is they log back into their FAFSA at FAFSA.gov and they click View or Print Student Aid Report. And they need to review page 1 of that student aid report, because if there is an error, then it will let them know what that is. Now, guys, for specific errors, if the student doesn't understand, if you, the mentor, do not quite understand what FAFSA is indicating the error to be, or what have you, you can always email me or call me, and I can kind of hopefully troubleshoot a little bit for you and your mentee and let you guys know what you now need to do. But in terms of understanding what problem is, I mean, the source is always check the student aid report. That will generally let you know what that error is. So that's for that question there I just wanted to address. So again, if the student, or if you as a mentor, you don't quite understand after looking at the student aid report, understand what maybe the error is, or whatever, in this case, quote, Rome State in particular may be asking for, follow up with me, and I'll see if I can't decipher what perhaps is being asked. And then, sorry, Kate, one more question. The last one here on here was, again, more of a statement than a question, encouraging students to explore all their options for financial aid and not waiting until they receive a W-2. So again, I assume this is a statement, and I think Graham did a great job of explaining, specifically addressing this as it pertains to paying for travel expenses and books and those other costs that are associated with college education. You know, folks, students need to complete their FAFSA to see what they qualify for from a federal and a state perspective. But then thereafter, they also need to apply for any scholarships that the college, might have for them. So, right, the community colleges, they may have some scholarships that they can offer certain students who meet certain requirements, perhaps academically or from an ACT perspective, that those students, as Graham said earlier, that those students can then use in turn to help pay for books and travel and stuff like that. And then also, the student needs to work with his or her high school counselor to make sure they're applying for all that local aid that probably at this point in time, now it's March 4th, it's becoming available. They need to apply for, that local Chamber of Commerce scholarship or Rotary scholarship or, Farmers Bank scholarship or what have you. They need to apply for those sources of aid as well. And how they do that is they need to follow up with their school counselor and just see what applications there or what scholarships might be available locally for them to apply for. And they need to review, once the counselor points them in that direction, they need to review the requirements, and if they meet the requirements of a certain scholarship, they need to apply for it. So, that's how they explore their other options. I mean, the FAFSA generally takes care of federal and state aid, and then they need to talk with the institution, the college itself, to see if there's any additional scholarships that the student can apply for through the college, and then finally work with the school counselor to see if there's any local scholarships that they can apply for as well. Kate, sorry about that.
I just have 2 more questions that I think your expertise can best answer.
Okay.
One, if a student filed a FAFSA on paper rather online, can they view an SAR?
All right, so for those of you who may not have heard of Kate, so if a student filed the FAFSA on paper instead of doing it online, wow. Well, here's the thing. Eventually, that FAFSA is going to be loaded into FAFSA.gov, okay? So in other words, if I did a paper application on January the 1st, guys, it may take up to 12 weeks for that FAFSA to be loaded into FAFSA.gov. So, it's one of those things is if you and I were talking, if this was a question back during our previous webinars, I would say immediately have that student go to FAFSA.gov and now and enter that application electronically, because unfortunately, A student, and guys, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what application date FAFSA will assign to a paper FAFSA. I don't know. So in other words, if I filed a paper FAFSA on January 1st, if FAFSA does not get around to loading that until February the 20th, then unfortunately FAFSA may assign that paper FAFSA a February 20th date. So, which would obviously not satisfy Tennessee Promise requirement. Again, I'm going into something I'm not really sure how FAFSA deals with paper FAFSAs, because in my opinion, paper FAFSA should not even be an option. But anyways, whomever directly asked that question, if you'd like for me to look into our system to see if we received their FAFSA information, I can do that for you and see what date it was assigned to and this and the other. But again, to answer your question, once ever FAFSA actually processes that paper FAFSA, eventually they will load it into FAFSA.gov for that student to be able to use to look at their student aid report. But again, back to what we were saying earlier, if they have processed that FAFSA, if they use an email on that paper FAFSA, they should have now been emailed or at least mailed a student aid report. So again, it goes back to they should have heard something if it's been processed. Okay, the second question.
The second question was just, when will students receive letters from TSAC letting them know about the TSAA?
All right. So TSAA. Here's the thing. You should always love when I preface something by here's the thing. So we have actually begun sending out TSAA letters, and unfortunately they have created more confusion than we anticipated, because many of the letters that are going out right now are indicating thank you for applying, completing your FAFSA and applying for the Tennessee Student Assistance Award. Unfortunately, funds have been expended and you are not eligible for TSCA. And this is a letter that's being received specifically for students that have a 0 EFC, who you and I otherwise might expect to be eligible for TSCA. So again, here's the thing. We're now after March 1. So downstairs right now, my colleagues are looking at the students who have submitted their FAFSA and who may be eligible for a TSCA from a renewal perspective. So in other words, a student who received TSCA during the 14-15 academic year, so long as they still are eligible in 15-16 and submit their FAFSA prior to March 1st, they will receive TSAA first prior to any high school seniors, all right? So then thereafter, we will begin awarding high school seniors who have a 0 EFC. Note, we're only going to award a high school senior that has a 0 expected family contribution as derived by FAFSA, beginning with January 1st. So as of today, I don't know what our cutoff date is, all right? So I can't speculate to that for that matter. So to the mentor who asked the question, are letters being mailed? They have been. Unfortunately, they're basically all being said to these high school seniors that you're not eligible right now. That is actually false, because some of these students will be eligible based on a 0 EFC and based on an early submission date. So my advice to you is, as Graham mentioned earlier about the TSAC student portal, they need to rely on their TSAC student portal to review their eligibility for the Tennessee Hope Scholarship, and also to review their eligibility for the Tennessee Student Assistance Award. Because as these students, as we flip the switch on some of them to make them eligible for TSCA, they're going to know their eligibility based on the TSAC student portal. So again, if you have a student that has a 0 EFC, I would have them to periodically check their TSAC student portal to ascertain whether or not their eligibility has been updated in the portal. And the same goes for the Tennessee Hope Scholarship. I may have mentioned this in previous webinars. I will tell you guys right now, we are not sending out Tennessee Hope Scholarship eligibility letters at this time. So if a student wants to see if they meet the requirements for the Tennessee Hope Scholarship, meaning as of today, any kid that has a 21 ACT or better, then they need to look at their student portal account in order to see if they qualify for the Tennessee Hope Scholarship.
Those are all the questions that we have.
Kate, thank you. Kate said that's all the questions. Now, you did say there was one Tennessee Chiefs question, so Graham.
That has been answered.
Oh, Graham, good, great. That's been answered. So, guys, as always, on behalf of Kate from College for 10 and Graham with Tennessee Achieves, I thank you so much for your participation. I'm going to go back to our contact slides. If you have need anything, you have my email address, you have Graham's email address, you have Kate's email address as well, so feel free to email me or us if you have any follow-up questions. Some of you have our phone numbers as well, and you're always more than welcome to call us on our phone numbers as well. So,
can you just repeat where people would view the student portal?
Yeah, Kate just wants me to repeat about the TSAC student portal. Again, that web address is www.tn.gov/TSAC student portal, all one word. TSAC student portal, all one word. That's where they would go to log into their portal account. And as Graham mentioned earlier, this is the same place where they initially completed their promise application. So, within the portal, they can view their information and eligibility for HOPE and for TSCA, and then also they can make a change of institution request if they see, for example, if they're eligible for TSCA and HOPE, it's going to say what college that money is geared for as of today. And so, if they log in, they see that money's geared for, say, Nashville State, but they're now going to actually attend Volunteer State Community College, Vol State, for example, then they can do a change of institution request via the portal and update that information for their HOPE and TSCA, which ultimately will impact their promise eligibility. They can make those changes to the TSAC student portal as well. So, is that good?
Yes, that is.
All right, guys. Well, Kate may want to say goodbye as well. So, guys, I'm just going to say from my perspective, guys, as always, take care and God bless. Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming, and